All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our session on payments. I think everyone knows who I am, so I'm going to skip my introduction, but we have two fantastic panelists with me today. And one of the things that we wanted to do this Vertex was just to create some breakout sessions that were a bit more intimate and a bit more thematic. Since we all are heads of payments or similar type roles, we're going to go really deep today. So some of the general sessions are more broad. This one is meant to truly be a deep dive. We will allow some time for questions at the end. And so without further ado, I would like to introduce our panelists. We will start all the way to the left with Laura.
Hey all, I'm Laura Collinson. I have been building the financial services business at Jobber for the last 6 years, and that's really a scaled payments and capital business, and then some smaller businesses we're incubating at various stages of growth. We're pretty excited at Jobber about the blue-collar renaissance. I mean, this is being fueled by AI's changes to the labor market, but it's a really exciting space to be in. And I think, part of our mission is creating more blue-collar millionaires. And so part of how we do that is with an operating system to manage the entirety of your business. So everything from sales and marketing to scheduling to day of execution to, of course, invoicing and getting paid, and all the kind of customer conversations that go along with that. So an exciting time for us. We run the fintech business with a cross-functional, fully dedicated fintech leadership team, some of whom are in the room today. Before I was at Jobber, I spent a couple years in SMB lending. I ran part of the Funding Circle UK business through their IPO. And very bullish on lending, both the micro impact on businesses themselves, but also kind of the economic macro benefit. And before that, I worked for probably a few too many years at BCG in consulting, and also worked as a trade economist and trade negotiator.
Very good. Evan.
Evan De Silva. I'm the SVP of Payments at Bloomerang. Before Bloomerang, I was at a company called Buildium that was in the prop tech space. Signed up with them, built out a PayFac, and took them from about $2 billion of GMV to $10 billion of GMV. Signed up for Bloomerang, which is a CRM for fundraising. A CRM and fundraising application for nonprofits. I started the journey with them at about $100 million of GMV, and I'm about to get them to $2 billion of GMV. So I'm about to kind of close the whole continuum from $100 million to $10 billion on the journey. But super excited about where we are in payments right now, and with all the opportunity with AI coming up over the next year. So very, very bullish on what that's going to do for the fundraising market.
Very good. Well, let's start with a topic that comes up time and time again in surveys, which of course is attach rate and adoption. We can't get through a panel with payments without talking about the two of them. So let's kind of talk about, a lot of companies are focused on that. How in your organizations do you think about attach rate and adoption? How do they interplay between them? What's most important? How do you measure success? You guys both have really great scaled payment businesses. And for those who may not be quite as far along the journey, how have you gotten there? I'll start with Laura.
Sure. Of course, adoption is important, but I think it's not the most important. And I think probably the reason that we are so focused on adoption is because the real forerunners in vertical SaaS, Toast and Shopify, if you got your customers to adopt, you then by necessity got 100% of their revenue. That's not the case for platforms like Jobber, where checks are still prevalent. Raise your hand if the last time somebody came to your home to provide a service, they paid you with a check. Just show of hands. Yeah, what the hell, guys? So, I'm kidding.
Post-afternoon slum,
So, long story short, if you get a customer to attach, but they're processing 2% of their volume through you, you're not benefiting. They're really not getting the value out of your product. And so we much more often think about what we call GPV over GSV, essentially the percentage of their revenue they're actually processing through you. We could talk more about how we've done that, but I think that's a real focus for us beyond just attached.
And you said that's GPV over GSV.
Right, so processing volume over gross services volume, so the GMV equivalent in services.
Interesting metric. Okay, Evan.
Yeah, I mean, we think about it all the way through the funnel. Certainly care about adoption at the front door and have built our product. I think it was somebody in AJ's panel that said, okay, we've made the product now, so you have to sign our toast, right? Michelle said, hey, we've set our product up, so you have to sign up for payments as the first thing. We've taken that step. We certainly focus relentlessly on activation, taking the customer through the customer journey, making sure we have alignment through the funnel, the same thing that they're hearing in sales, they're hearing in onboarding, conversions, all the way through their transaction migration and into the post-sales motion. Unfortunately, we did not have a walled garden at Bloomerang, so I have a bunch of legacy processors in the backbook that I need to migrate. So we also think about GPV over GSV. Fortunately, we can see all of our revenue under management, and we have a very targeted sales motion to go after those customers that are processing on the backbook and bring them onto platform.
And we talked a little bit in the prep sessions about moving people from the backbook over. You've tried certain things, Evan, some of which didn't quite work. Tell us a little bit about some spiffs, other incentives. What happened?
So I think I failed here about 3 times before I got it right. I finally got to a good place with it. People do what you pay them to do, but you have to be really careful about incentives. The first swing that I took with it, we set up a program where we were setting up spiffs for our account managers, largely comped on ARR, and we tiered out the top 500 customers on the backbook, assigned a spiff value to each of them, and it was, say $2,000 for a tier 1 customer, $1,000 for a tier 2, and $500 for tier 3. And my head of sales said, we can't do this. If they go close all this revenue, they're going to double their OTE. Steve, great problem to have. Let's go see if we do that. And just completely whiffed. Turns out that the spiff wasn't important because people needed to get to 80% of quota. Then when they got to 80% of quota, it was better for them to get into their accelerators than into the spiff. So they just never focused on it. We ran this for 2 months with huge lucrative incentives. We closed 3 of the top 500 customers. So just completely fell on my face. What I learned from it was, again, people do what you pay them to do. We needed to have a team set up focused specifically on net payments revenue, on NPR. That was a bit of a cultural shift. Ultimately, the sales team didn't want to take that on. So they didn't want a sales motion outside of the sales org, but they also didn't want a sales team that got paid on NPR. So it came down to this is one or the other. I get measured on how much of the backbook that we migrate. Either you got to compensate the people on NPR or I got to build out a sales function. We did the latter. And then once we were able to compensate folks on NPR, I pay 50% on adoption, closed won, and 50% on activation. So make sure that we're actually capturing the volume off the backbook. And that works really, really well. But it took a while. I've given you that story in 2 minutes. It's kind of 2 or 3 years to actually work through that process, to actually get the right set of incentives and the right people in place to execute on that motion.
Yeah, across the 100+ companies that we work with, we've seen sometimes incentives can work. More often than not, they don't. And so I think it really is understanding the culture of your organization. And, in your case, they had alternative measures they were trying to get to, accelerators and things like that. I have seen it work in some cases, but it's a lot harder than people think. Laura, where is payments sold within Jobber? Is that a separate team? Is it?
All of the above. We've tried everything.
And what's worked?
What's worked? I think this is an ongoing project. I think as somebody really building out the fintech business, you're constantly trying to rewire the entire go-to-market journey, from marketing all the way to support. And so I spend a lot of my time thinking about this and finding the right leaders and making sure we're pointed in the right direction. We have certainly had success. I would say surgically implanting sales DNA, payment sales DNA within teams. In some cases, that's reported to me. In some cases, that's reported to sales. In some cases, it's reported to post-sales. But I think bringing in people who get the motion and can really teach, a number of others to do that is really important. I think that was the big unlock for us.
And where do you find those people? Are you going and hiring people who sold payments before in another life? Are you taking people who sold software and teaching them payments? Where? Because that's a common question. Is like, where do you find these people?
I think I think you need at least one person. This is the surgical injection of payment sales DNA. So we found somebody who was kind of a mid-level manager, had sold payments at various places, and so could come in and just build the playbook, train an entire group to do something that nobody had ever done before. And I think that's true in kind of various parts of the fintech business, is finding those places where one or two people make a huge difference.
I'll totally echo that. The first hire that we had for our sales team focused on payments had experience selling payments and helped to shift the culture. Now, subsequent hires, we've hired a couple people who sold payments previously. I just hired somebody, my best sales rep, never even sold previously. We just interviewed her. She was fantastic. And we're like, okay, I think you have all the skill sets to go take this job on. And I know that you have a really great coach in place who's going to get you there. So I think it's great to have a mix. But the reason we're successful is the first hire we stuck the landing on.
Totally. You can't start with nothing. Like, I think we also tried that early days of like, let's just kind of help these folks go from software to payments. And that's a hard road.
Before we move on from this topic, when you think about the metrics, you both have kind of a very specific metric you look at. Is that really confined to the payments team, or does the broader business as a whole look at that as kind of a top, maybe 5 metric of the whole company? How elevated do your payment metrics get? Because that's another topic that I want to get into later, but this leads into it.
I think we would always want them to be more elevated. I think there's, always appetite for us to be, as high as possible in the priority stack. That said, I mean, there are a lot of things we're doing as a business, and they're really important. So, but certainly, when our numbers are good, that is recognized, and when they're not, we hear about it. So, folks are paying attention.
It depends where in the business you're looking at, but adoption, attach rate are looked at very highly across the business. And then we think about volume a lot from a macro standpoint. I try to move us away from thinking about net payments revenue. I know everyone gets excited about it in the financial reports. The reality is, I tell my team, most of you here can't affect net payments revenue. Don't worry about it. I'm on the take rate. There are a few of us here that are working on the take rate. The rest of you drive as much volume as you can. A few of us will optimize it for you. I just don't want people to get hung up in that. It's just too many ins and outs of interchange plus and all that stuff that people, melts their brain when they think about. So attach, adoption, and then volume that we bring on the platform.
Yeah, and same. We incentivize sales on GPV.
Let's pull on that thread margin, because we have payments people in the room. I think most of us probably have some responsibility for optimizing cost. Laura, I know you guys invested a lot over the last year or two in maybe what I would call a rigorous cost optimization exercise from what we've talked about. Can you maybe share a little bit about what actually moved the needle, what didn't? If you had maybe more limited resources than, say, a jobber does, where do you think people should focus?
Yeah, and I don't think it's a resource-intensive process, I will say.
Okay.
I think when we were smaller, we thought about this as like, do a health check every year and then let it go. I think we've now realized, especially with CDP and DCAP, there actually are, major changes coming down the pipe that you have to be thoughtful of. I think the 2 biggest movers for us were just being really thoughtful about the data we're passing, so making sure we're optimizing CDP, optimizing downgrades, et cetera. And then also low-cost debit routing. I know you've had a very different experience on this, but we found that we were able to really drive impact from low-cost routing. We also caught a Stripe bug, so I think part of actually the benefit of doing cost optimization and getting really tight was being able to find errors, coming downstream to us and catch those. I think there's then a longer tail of like MCC optimization and other things that may not be that helpful unless you're fairly large. But even just understanding what all the levers are and making sure that you and your partner are not somehow disadvantaging you, I think is super valuable.
Yeah, you had a very different experience, though, with least cost debit routing. Tell us what you had happen.
I did, and it's funny, I have a different experience for MCCs as well. It's actually super important for us,
get
the
into it.
nonprofit space, to and it's funny, I was talking to somebody else who was here who's in the kind of adjacent nonprofit space working in K through 12, and they have to go through, same thing as us, every quarter, and make sure that we have everybody routed into the right MCC to 8593.
Because it's so low.
Because it's so low. Yeah, there's about a 75 basis point difference when you get into that MCC. So hugely important, and a lot of our customers get misclassed. But at the same time, with least cost routing, we ran an analysis on it, and what came back with the decline we were going to get in auth rates wasn't worth the decrease that we were going to get in interchange rates. We would have saved a little bit of money, but it was really pretty much, it was negligible. It was pretty much a wash. We said, okay, for the level of effort, not worth it for us, and we'll go revisit it. We just have a very simple use case. We're domestic. We're almost entirely e-com, so there just wasn't a lot of opportunity for us to optimize. But had the answer, came up in a board meeting, was happy to talk about it. So it's like, okay, I've done the due diligence. We're okay.
The answer is A/B tested.
Yeah. And curious, because it sounds like you didn't actually implement it. How did you know that you were going to have a decline in auth rate before you did the implementation if you didn't A/B test it?
The folks at Stripe can do modeling for you to tell you what your auth rate would have been based off of your payment history.
Yeah, so I think definitely takeaway there is make sure you're pushing your payment processors and vendors to bring data to the table, but also check it. We're in at Rainforest, we're in a very, I think, unique vantage point because we do, as part of our sales cycles, a lot of analysis of what people are qualifying for interchange today, and even take two SaaS companies of relatively similar size and similar card mix and similar verticals, and we see radically different pass-through costs from different processors. And so kind of this notion that interchange is not. I think we've kind of talked about the advanced strategies. There may be people here who are still at the basic level of just making sure you get good qualification. I want to talk a little bit about checks, because in both of your industries, for very different reasons, checks are still pretty prevalent, right, in both nonprofit and field services. How much of this do you think is consumer preference versus merchant preference and not wanting to pay for the fees? I'll start, Evan, with you.
For us, I think it's largely driven by consumer preference. I was in the prop tech space, and it was also consumer preference there. If you can find out how to get my father not to pay his HOA dues with a check, I'd like you to convince him. Super hard to do, and I think even worse in our space, that I think there's a 7% secular decline in check usage year over year. We're behind that trend. We're seeing about a 4% decline year over year. We have looked at check scanning in depth. I think the technology is finally there. We didn't really trust it 2 years ago when we did a deep dive on it. But as we've been following along, we're thinking about implementing with a solution. Moving into treasury and financial accounts is will unlock check scanning for us. So we're thinking about going after that payment modality. But something I know we talked about before this, I've also had vastly different experiences in trying to get a mix shift in payment modalities. I had a lot of success with it at Buildium. This is another area that I failed.
And how did you do that at Buildium?
At Buildium, it was just a user experience change in our resident portal. Super simple.
So changing the layout of the page, the options, the ordering, those types of things.
Yes. Yep. And I had gotten a tip from another operator who was in GovTech, which is very similar, right? And our investors at Warburg also had ProCare, and they ran the same thing. I mean, what if GovTech, PropTech, and Daycare have all in common? You have a captive user who has to make a payment, and they're always going to make it and you have them in that portal, and they're going to make it every month or whatever every quarter, whatever the period is. Now, for a consumer-facing application with Bloomerang, I got there and I was like, yeah, totally. I'm going to totally change our card mix. We're going to see debit cards rolling in left and right, and there was literally zero difference. It's all about consumer preference. They're going to choose the modality that they want to pay with, which gets back to checks. If they're going to pay with checks, they're going to pay with checks. And for me, I just determined there were ultimately better places for us to invest in increasing our take rates other than payments modality mix shift.
Okay, so I'm going to disagree.
Good. I love contentious panels. This is the best. This is where you get to the real nuggets.
I mean, I think there are elderly customers who do want to pay with checks. There is that segment. But I think for the vast majority of homeowners, they would prefer something that is digital and invisible, or it's as invisible as possible. I think what we find is that it's our customers who are fee sensitive, and that really drives a preference for check, cash, Venmo, et cetera. And often our customers hold the balance of power in that relationship between merchant and consumer. I think how we are working to thread the needle is ACH. ACH kind of solves everyone's problems, but it's still a fairly unknown and nascent payment method, especially outside of government, telco, et cetera. So I think education around ACH or pay by bank, whether it's ACH, FedNow, RTP, et cetera, is a real focus for us because it's so win-win-win across all parties, including us.
it's actually a good nuance that you hit on there. My customers are not fee sensitive. I process in one of the verticals where actually those fees are passed on to consumers, to donors, so we don't have to worry about it as much.
Because they surcharge, because that's a loophole.
We're allowed to surcharge
right.
in the
Interesting.
nonprofit space, which is why, and I think that probably most folks are in your seat. So what I said was true, but probably misleading for a lot of the folks in this room.
The vertical does matter.
I don't want to go too deep into surcharging. That's probably a topic for another panel. But Laura, how do you think surcharging will ultimately kind of affect that merchant perception if merchants can now pass on fees? And again, in a very broad general sense, let's not get into the nuances, but in a very broad sense, if more and more merchants can pass on fees, do you think you're going to see a significant increase in credit card utilization?
I wish I had that answer. I think this is where it depends which platform you are and what people's alternatives are. I think you can actually bifurcate the landscape into merchants who have great other options. It's really easy for consumers in our spaces to move to a check, to vote with their dollars. It's really hard to pay for a pizza with a check, and so that's probably not something that Toast is worried about. So I think whether surcharging has an impact, I think in part will depend on what the end consumer's other options are and what the merchant's other options are. I think in our space, that kind of easy switch to check makes it a risk.
Yeah, fair enough. I want to move on to another topic completely, which is AI and fraud. Many of you I saw in our panel earlier on agentic commerce. So we're not actually going to talk too much about agentic commerce because I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but in your verticals, agentic probably doesn't make a huge difference yet. Is that fair?
That's fair.
Yeah, I think the first thing will be agentic discovery in our space, but I think agentic commerce is a ways off because we have such non-skewed services.
Nonetheless, AI still is impacting both of your businesses in a very meaningful way from what we've talked about. Evan, I want to start with you. You went almost 3 years without any payment losses at Bloomerang, which is phenomenal. I know many of us would be highly envious to have literally 0 losses. Then last year, something happened. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. One of the offshoots of AI, which I think we knew was coming but still weren't prepared for, was just how inexpensive it was going to be for fraudsters, threat actors to mimic our customers, to kind of test the fence and get through the gate. We have really great kind of post-onboarding transaction monitoring, so we're pretty good at catching it most of the time. But the example that I've given people is we used to really, I could go look at a fraudulent site for a nonprofit, and usually I could identify it like line of sight pretty easy. We had someone come through the other day who took a very reputable nonprofit, changed one letter in their website, ripped their entire website, and just changed out one of the board of directors. So literally graphic for graphic, image for image, word for word, an exact replica. So when my underwriter missed it, it was like, well, I get it.
Can't blame them for that, right?
Yeah, and like the website name change was just so they added an S to one word, right? They made it plural instead of singular. So it's like, okay, it's an easy thing to get through. So we've really had to adjust. And granted, we have AI on our side, so we've been leveraging a lot of tools too to do better in what we're doing from transaction monitoring as well as underwriting and risk scoring. But the biggest shift that I've seen from AI hasn't been a positive for product development lifecycle or internal tools. Well, we've gotten lifts from those. It's really been the account takeovers that we're seeing. And I probably had to deal with 1 or 2 a year my first 3 years. I probably deal with a couple a month now. So it's a whole order of magnitude shift of what I've seen on the fraud side.
Yeah, the change of pace is phenomenal. Talk to us a little bit about how you're thinking about AI, either positively or negatively.
Yeah, I think we're certainly seeing it on the risk side. I don't think it's changing our financial profile at this point, but certainly, the game of cat and mouse has accelerated, and the only thing to do is sprint. And so we're seeing all kinds of things. The rise of consumer scams. Are customers getting scammed by end consumers? I mean, ID verification and document falsification is growing quite materially. Even just a fraudster's ability to correspond in a quite a sophisticated way with our support team, like this all has become free, and so lots happening there. But on the flip side, I mean, this is also fueling a lot of velocity growth and a lot of new opportunities. So, much upside as well.
Yeah, we're seeing from our vantage point a lot of platforms getting caught flat-footed, who maybe had a less developed risk engine team apparatus, and for a long time that was fine because there wasn't that much fraud. Now with AI, fraudsters can do all sorts of document falsification and things. I remember back, 20 years ago when I started, our underwriters had literally a book with copies of all of the state driver's licenses, so you knew kind of what each state's driver's license was supposed to look like. Now you have fabricated bank statements that look perfect, that have coffee stains on them, they're ripped in the right places, and they're virtually indistinguishable. And so I'm kind of curious, in an age where we really can't rely anymore on graphical documents, you just can't, right? How do you navigate that? I'll start, Laura, with you.
Yeah, I think this is where the layered approach to risk management comes in. I think the more that you know about your customer, the better. And there's all kinds of great data providers and things that you can kind of suck in yourself that can help you. And bringing that together in thoughtful models that mean that you actually have humans reviewing less and less it's one of those, like, the only way forward is through. I think you just have to build an incredible risk engine and build it as fast as you can.
Yeah, we're assuming that people are going to get through now. We're relying much more heavily on transaction monitoring, post-onboarding. Not that we're not doing underwriting, we're improving all of our underwriting models and trying to get better at identifying fraudulent documents, but it's the assumption now where previously is, okay, we have a really strong gate, we don't have to worry about it, folks aren't going to get through. We have a very robust set of cohorting our customers, risk scoring all of our customers, and then, a whole set of logic on the back end of our platform that identifies how our customers should behave and flagging those customers when they break a pattern very, very quickly to put a human in the loop and review them. So I'd say it's shifted now to that second layer now has become much more important.
Yeah, I think it's really a multi-variable approach. I think even 3, 4, 5 years ago, you could look at transaction velocity, and once it hit a certain trigger, you shut them down, or certain factors that were kind of outside of pattern. And I actually think that just doesn't really work anymore. I think you have to look at how did they get in the front door, what do the documents look like at that time, in conjunction with what the transaction monitoring looks like, in conjunction with device biometrics, in conjunction with browser behavior, in conjunction with 4, 5, 6 things. And so all I can say is that if you're a platform that hasn't invested in very sophisticated risk management, and you're maybe with a processor who doesn't offer really sophisticated tooling, you will very quickly become the soft target, and fraud will migrate to you because those of us who are ahead are making a stronger front door, and so people are going to go burglarize the front doors that aren't as fortified. So I think we're about to see a huge wave coming of fraud and losses, especially in verticals that are, quote, safe. Most people would say, oh, nonprofit, pretty safe vertical, and yet here we are talking about losses. Let's talk a little bit about the theme of the day, durability, resiliency, fintech as a mode. Laura, let's start with you. You said, and this is a quote, fintech star is rising. In the context of attach rates, margin pressure, AI-driven fraud, all of these things, how do you think going deeper into fintech, really doubling, tripling down on it, how is that helping to create a moat? And also, how do you get buy-in from the rest of the organization who maybe sees your numbers are growing, but maybe doesn't appreciate the fact that you need to create this moat as much as you might?
Yeah, there's a lot there. I think, interesting thinking about the conversation we just had around fraud. It's easy to vibe code a scheduling app. It's hard to vibe code, an entire financial, wraparound set of financial services that beautifully embeds with your operating system. So, and that's in part because it's a regulated space, but it's also because you need to build an entire risk apparatus around that. So I think there's just the moat of it being uncopyable. I think there's also the depth of relationship you can build with your customer. I think, we're finding that especially as we go deeper and play more of a role in our customers' financial lives, one of the things our CTO always talks about is becoming our employees or our customers' best employee. And we're certainly not laying tile, but we can be, their best back office employee doing their white collar work. And so the more of those dollars and financial flows that happen through us, the more of a trusted financial advisor we are, and the simplification of their software stack down to a very small number. I think that creates a very deep, long-lasting, trusting relationship with our customers that's hard to supplant. And so, certainly you can do that on the operations side as well, becoming their marketer, becoming their salesperson, but becoming the company that runs their money and yet deeply understands their operations and can give that context to their money is a pretty powerful place to be.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think that payments, I always tell people, the economics are great, TAM expansion's fantastic. It starts with the customer experience, full stop. And I know that we can support our customers with payments better than any third-party provider can. I know that we can manage their risk better. I know we can manage their onboarding better. And I know, for example, the fun story that I like to tell is we don't have a, hopefully the fraudsters aren't listening. We don't have a limit on the transaction size that we will let you process. So we had a donor who came through and made a $500,000 donation on a MasterCard, which seemed crazy to me. I was like, flag this, let's research it. Who does that? Well, the vice chairman of MasterCard. That's who does it. He's getting the issuing fees on it, right? And he's got the money for it. Makes all the sense in the world. Now, I think there's a lot of other platforms who, if there wasn't this vertical layer, if it wasn't someone who says, okay, I know nonprofits specifically, there's a reason this could happen, and I'm going to put somebody on it to actually go in and to dig into who's making that donation and understand it, that gets denied a lot of the time. So ended up being great for our business ultimately, and was a great cut. I think that the nonprofit organization probably would have rather not given up the fees, but I think that they'll take the fees, and they understood why, because it was coming from MasterCard. So I think being able to differentiate and delight customers with those type of experiences, or for example, account takeover, getting somebody set back up immediately with no fraud losses for their account, can turn into we're seeing it turn into a delightful experience, turning the most stressful moment that somebody can possibly have, having their personal information invaded, into something where it's buttoned up and they're back and running and working on their mission immediately. It's a really, really hard experience to replicate, and I don't know that unless you're embedded and it's somebody who really understands the vertical, if that can be delivered truly by a third-party processor.
I think that's a really great point. The fact that you have so much data to wrap around the transactions is sometimes lost on people, but that makes a huge difference. We are in a smaller group here, and so I want to allow plenty of time for questions. We've got a wealth of knowledge here, decades of experience amongst our panelists. So what questions do you have for them?
In the fraud prison that you just spoke about, and maybe the question we don't even in the nonprofit sector, from a parting attack perspective, can you set some color relative to what sort of advent of that you see by way of AI? Less about the imposter scenario, but more about just who's attack of parting testing like that.
And just for the recording, to repeat the question, basically, the gist of it was asking about how do you see AI as it relates to card testing, high-velocity card testing type attacks versus imposters or account takeovers?
It's a great question. We see a lot of it. It was actually something I didn't have to deal with in my past life in prop tech because we were behind a gated experience. Right now, I'm a consumer-facing page and I'm out in the wild. We put our money where our mouth is, so we absorb chargeback losses, authorization losses, so we don't make our customers pay for it. We put really robust fraud monitoring behind it, and we track the metrics, identify who's getting attacked, and immediately implement custom logic if we need to on a per account basis. Normally there's some type of logic that you can put in place, and sometimes the goalposts move a little bit with the fraudster who's figuring out what logic you might have put in behind the scenes. But it is something that is always front of mind for us. And I can tell you that I actually have 3 separate payment platforms that I run on it at Bloomerang. We have Stripe, TSYS, and WorldPay, and the tools matter a lot. I see a lot more card testing on some of my processors than I do on other processors, so the investment is well worth it. And then the value proposition to go to my customers and say, oh, don't worry about this, you've experienced it, don't worry, we absorb all the costs. Not a problem. That's our promise to you that you're not going to have to deal with this as an NPO. And our customers, small nonprofits, like they don't have the time for it. They can't think about it.
Yeah, I think that'll be an interesting shift with a lot of acquirers and processors historically have just been, here's a dumb pipe and we're going to sell it very cheaply. That no longer works because you need all the tooling wrapped around it. And so your options are either build it yourself, which unless you have massive scale, I don't recommend, get separate tooling, and then you start to have to manage all these integrations, or find someone that kind of does it all in one. But there's going to be a price differential between those, and I don't know if the market has caught up to that quite yet. What other questions?
I have a question for Evan. So in our industry, we take large payments as well. So like last night, I had 186,000 card charge go through that got held by Global Payments. So as we're moving to controlling our own risk, in our side, our software, we have invoice information, job information. Just curious from your perspective, what kind of info do you look to validate that charge to feel good about it?
So the question was, if for really large charges, maybe over $100,000 even, as platforms move to take risk, what information, Evan, and specifically to you, do you use to decide and decision whether you're going to let that through or not, whether that's invoice data or otherwise?
Yeah, absolutely. So it depends on the transaction size, the customer. I have some customers that I would just let them process $100,000, right? They're large enough. They've been with us for enough years. They have enough tenure. We're not going to review the transaction. We're going to let it run. For other customers, if something comes through that does get flagged, right, and it can be as small as a $5,000 transaction or as high as a $100,000 transaction, we'll certainly go and look at the user behavior in their application. I love looking at user behavior. I think that that's super valuable. Certainly go and look how they built out their software. Do we feel like this is an instance of bust-out fraud? Have they changed bank accounts? Have new users been added to the account to really great data signals? We will also go investigate the payee. So we use third-party data tools. We have LexisNexis, and we'll go do research on the person making the payment as well. So the answer is all for a large payment like that where we have uncertainty, all of the above. That's very specifically where my team spends a lot of their time.
I'm just curious, actually, a quick show of hands between two options. Who in here takes risk on as the platform, and who has their processor take risk? So show of hands, who takes risk themselves? Got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. And who here has their processor take risk? Interesting. So we've got almost a 50-50 split. That's a very interesting dynamic. Okay, we've got time for maybe one or two more questions in the far back.
Curious about your guys' strategies around price increases.
Strategies around price increases. Laura, maybe start with you.
Yeah, you sound like my CFO. I think we've talked about adoption and kind of depth of usage, GPV over GSV in our lingo. We are in the early innings, and so at this point, I would love to avoid having any barriers to getting people excited about payments, especially because ACH is still not well adopted, well known in the market, and fee sensitivity is particularly acute for small customers who have been just taking cash as they start their business or taking checks. So I'm bearish on price increases, at least at this stage in our journey and kind of in the digital adoption journey of field services. Certainly we need to run a business, and so we do make sure we're keeping up with the market. Yeah, I think it's not my first lever to pull. Any more specific questions in there?
I guess, do you observe your pay rates progressing over time? Are you just enough to fight off the basically?
Yeah, we are not facing compression, which is great. So certainly there's, if we were really aggressive on pricing, there'd be, more margin to take. I'm sure there's a decent amount there, but I'd love to kind of keep that in our back pocket for the future.
And do you find that you're not feeling that because you've largely focused on the cost optimization side?
Cost optimization, and we gradually have increased prices over time to keep pace with the market. So there's, there is still some
movement.
Margin improvement flowing through the system, and we're also optimizing, within payment methods. So there's opportunity there too.
I think depends where your business is at, right? We are in growth mode, so we are trying to keep ourselves priced low relative to the market. With that said, We've done multiple price increases, but we've done them strategically. So I have put price increases on people using third-party processors, right? I want everybody on platform, so I'm going to tax you for being off platform. The most critical thing in all of it is, as long as there is value delivered commensurate with the price increase, we also have implemented significantly better fundraising tools for our customers. So we've stopped developing on our lower suite of fundraising tools. So it's not a forced price increase, but if you want the best, the best offering that we have, you have to pay more for it. But it's very easy to articulate the value. We can boil it down to, do you think you are going to raise X amount more based off the tools that we're giving you? Yes? Okay, great. This is a good deal for you. So given that we're priced in share taking mode and we can have that value discussion, I think it works well. But that's what, even the third-party processors, we've even gated it with, we made sure we released features that were valuable to them when we implemented those price increases.
And is it public how much you charge for the third-party integrations?
Yeah, it is.
How much do you charge?
We charge 1%.
1%. Okay, so kind of following the Shopify type model.
Yeah, and what we really did is we up-leveled them to make sure that they're, whether you're processing on a third-party processor or on our internal, Bloomerang payments, we're agnostic. Doesn't matter. Basically, we leveled it up.
You make the same amount on net. Got it. Other questions?
Where do you draw the line to give flexibility to your merchants or like people on your platform and trying standardization? Like, where do you draw the line? Like, what trade-off do you do?
What kind of flexibility you're thinking about?
Like, how do they price their customers, or how do they use payments? Like, they want to just use the ACH, maybe not the credit cards, or they want to just use maybe Visa and MasterCard and not payments.
Yeah, so we have both global and quote and invoice specific settings. This is getting really deep down into the weeds, but long story short, if there's an invoice that you really want to make sure is not paid with card, you can make it ACH only. You can also set those preferences at a kind of
At a
business
merchant level, yeah.
Yeah, same. We offer, people can choose what payment methods they want to accept on a merchant level as well.
We've probably got time for one or two final questions.
I've talked to a number of operators today whose fintech groups account for much of the revenue or significant minority of the revenue of the business. Yet from like a product and engineering perspective and an internal understanding perspective, it seems to lack. How do you tell the story of fintech internally to make sure the business is aligned?
This is the $1 million question. I think there's many layers of this. I think you want to make sure that you and the co-founders are really aligned, that this is a huge priority. And then you want to work with kind of the head of product and chief revenue officer to make sure that you're really making it a core part of the product strategy and a core part of the go-to-market journey. That's work in progress. I think that's work that's never done. Yeah, I think there's kind of always a longer path to travel there. I don't know if that answers your question totally, but.
And Laura, do you have a dedicated payments engineer or fintech
Resourcing.
engineering team, or are you fighting for those each cycle?
It's a nuanced question. So we have essentially a matrixed fintech team. So there's the fintech leadership team that's kind of dedicated and cross-functional, and then all of their teams. So we have engineers, designers, product managers, analysts, a risk team, marketers who are fully kind of ring-fenced to fintech. Would we want more resources and a higher percentage of resources? Yes. But I think we still are, better resourced than, other peers or other operators that I talk to. So I think, one is, I think the whole AI story we're talking about today, fintech as a mode, I think that is a helpful story to tell. And we're certainly, our CEO is telling that story as well. So that helps. I think also just putting numbers on the board, if fintech's share of kind of incremental revenue each year is higher and higher, that is a way to really focus minds as well.
I think it all starts with where you sit in the organization. You put the chart up earlier today. I would not take a job where I didn't have a seat in the executive room as head of payments. I'm too important to the business. Sorry, it is what it is. I started off and it was a little absurd at first because this is like 3% of our revenue. Well, I'm almost at 30 now, and it's the second time that I've been on that same journey from 5 to 30. And it's like, well, the growth is also coming from my side of the business too, and that's super important. So I just think it's essential to have a seat at the table. And then from there, if you can start showing the growth, the story starts telling itself. But I when you put that up, Josh, today, I was like, oh, I loved it. I was like,
It
okay,
resonated.
and somebody had asked me it earlier. They had said, oh, should I hire somebody to be a head of payments? I was like, yes, and put them in your C-suite. They have to be there. I am the Lorax. I speak for the payments revenue. If I am not here, no one else is going to talk about it.
Quote of the day, I am the Lorax. All right, we're going to leave it there, folks. Thank you so much, Laura and Evan. Just an absolute wealth of knowledge. I encourage everyone to find these two later today. There was so much content we didn't even get to cover. 45 minutes is such a small block of time. But thank you both. Oh,
Also, just thank you for putting on this conference. I feel like I have learned so much over the years from people in this room. So to all be together is a very cool experience. So thank you.
yeah. Also, for heads of payments, we are going to be creating a closed Slack channel, kind of invite only, highly curated. And so look out for an invite for that. If for some reason you don't get one, let us know. And as long as you have the proper title and credentials, we'll let you in. But that, I think, will be a very valuable community as well. I think we'll get well over 100 head of payments there. It'll be one of the highest density head of payments. But again, thank you, everybody, and certainly encourage everybody to join. We've got one final session in the main room, and it's a really good one. So please join us there. Thanks.